Live from the Export Beer Garden studios, you're listening to the BYC, where today we'll be taking a look back at the fourth Ashes Test. And in a word, what an absolute shitter. One can only speculate what's going through the minds of the English at the moment. Their inability to put the Australians away in the first Test has truly come back to haunt them. It's a pity because they are obviously in the ascendant. The Aussies are struggling with injuries, their skipper is exhausted, and at times in this test match they looked in complete disarray. A rare sight indeed. The English weather robbed them of a probable victory and consequently robbed me of 2 glorious nights sitting on my ass eating copious bowls of chips. This series has delivered quality cricket in abundance, and the series deserved a cliffhanger, decider for the final test. Sadly, it is not to be, Dylan Cleaver.
Yeah, what a shocker. Like you, I had my weekend planned.
Yes.
Bowls of chips.
Maybe
those little triangular samosa things that you can stick in the air fryer.
All right, you got an air fryer, have you?
Yeah, a couple of beersies.
Yeah, sure. I prefer the chips and dip, actually.
It all came tumbling down with that bleak Manchester weather.
But seriously, and to both of you fellas, I mean, it's been such an extraordinary series. I'll go so far as to say the best series ever.
Better than 05?
Yes, in my view, the best series ever. And for me, Paul Ford, it's such a tragedy that there isn't a decider in that fifth test.
Oh, look, I totally agree. The theatricality of it all, the hyperbole, it meeting the hyperbole and the air of excitement, and it would have just been a beautiful thing for it all to come down 2-2. And, you know, as neutral observers and cricket lovers, you know, phenomenal series, great buzz, amazing crowds, great vibe, bit of niggle and controversy, which always makes things interesting. And it would have been fantastic if it had all come down to 2-2 at the Oval, and whoever walked away from there walked away with the spoils. But not to be. It was a damp squib, and it was very sad. I felt genuinely sad about it. It was absolutely anticlimactic to finish that way, and I guess it reminds us that we love the game, but cricket really can suck at times. And after 3 incredible test matches, I don't know. My abiding thing for me, I guess, was that winning the Ashes via a washout. Sorry, retaining the Ashes via a washout is like kissing your sister, and it's a little bit like winning a World Cup off a deflection.
Yeah. Yeah, fair point, man. I feel forlorn about it. I really do. Well, let's delve into it, fellas. The highlights, the lowlights. Wokes, who I've always rated very highly.
Have you?
Yes, I have. Genuinely, I have. I think he's a great... and the weird thing is, on a really fundamental level, for me, he just looks like the ultimate cricketer. He's got the perfect build. He's a good-looking fella. He's good with the ball. He's handy with the bat. He came to the fore for the English, Dylan.
Yeah, he did. I mean, Australia out for 317 on their first day and a bit. And it looked like England had blown it a little bit by putting them in on what turned out to be a beautiful-looking track. But, yeah, the English bowlers, apart from Anderson, have really dug in this series. I've been super impressed with Broad. Wokes, when he's come back into the squad, has made you wonder why he wasn't in earlier. And obviously Mark Wood, who couldn't play in the first 2 tests because he was still recovering from injury, but he's just been spectacular. But yeah, I mean, it set the test up brilliantly, didn't it? Because at one stage that wicket was looking so flat, you kind of thought, man, Australia could bat England out of this test.
Yeah, well, I remember the sort of headlines afterwards, after that first day, Paul, and if I recall correctly, fellas, the score was about 290 odd for 8.
Yep.
And everyone was saying even Stevens. My vibe was very much, actually, this looks like a belter of a pitch. And actually, I think the Australians have underperformed here with the bat.
Yeah, they have. And, you were talking about how you had sort of deep feelings for Chris Wokes. And, he's very low on the dickhead scale for me.
Yes.
He's just a really low-key, low-profile, do your job. Looks like he's having quite a good time, but sort of doesn't get caught up in any of the bullshit around any of this. Very, very easy to like, and feels like a bit of a Kiwi cricketer. I know he's not. I did read a nice story about him and Mark Wood, actually, and they were saying that they sit by the plane together they're all, Wood and Wokes, and they look after each other. They take each other's snacks, their favourite snacks. I don't know if it's cheese balls or what it is for them, Jace, but so when they see their mate who's a bit down, they pop into their room and they've brought some snacks from home. I can't remember the specifics, but it was a particular type of biscuit for each. And they sit by each other on the plane. And Mark Wood said sometimes when he gets a bit nervous on the flight, and this doesn't surprise me, Chris Wokes holds his hand, which is nice.
I've been known to hold a hand on a plane, to be honest with you fellas. I don't mind admitting that. I'm much better on planes now. But the question that I have too, I mean, all the Australian batsmen in that first inning sort of got starts, Dylan Cleaver. But talking about Wokes and Wood, as Paul was just doing, did they err in not playing those guys earlier?
I don't think they could play Wood earlier.
Oh, was he injured?
Yeah, well, he was coming back from injury.
Right, okay.
And they were playing safety first, and certainly those first two pitches, if you remember, were dead.
Yes.
They had no life in them. So maybe they were holding him back for when they knew they would get to Headingley, Manchester, and then the Oval, 3 of the quicker wickets. So I can understand that. I think they just made a mistake with Wokes. They are always dreaming that Anderson's going to return to peak Anderson, and obviously Ollie Robinson hadn't done a lot wrong in his career, so it's not as if they were picking Robinson on spec. They were picking him because he'd performed pretty well, but as it's turned out, he's been pretty ordinary in this series, and you look at it now and you go back to that first test and you think if it had been Wokes instead of Robinson, they would have got more runs out of the tail, and as it turned out, more wickets as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that we pondered in the last podcast, Paul Ford, re Anderson, and, there's been question marks about him. Is this the end for him? My feeling is you can go one way or the other with it. On any given day, I think he's still going to get a 5-for or a 3-for. You know what I mean? But I guess the question is, when do the English draw the line? And, Just for the record, an English bowling attack of Broad, Wokes, Tongue, and Wood, not bad.
No,
not good. Bad. What's your thought on Anderson in terms of where he's at?
I reckon he's done.
Okay.
On the home tests, I think they're not going to. I know we're probably going to talk about what to look ahead to in that 5th test a bit later on, but I feel like 4 wickets in the series, I think, something ridiculous like that. So we say he's due a 5-for. He's massively due. He's massively overdue, actually. And he looks the least penetrating of any of the bowlers in that English team. And he still looks beautiful, lovely rhythm, lovely run up, but just not particularly threatening. And he just looks maybe just, one notch below his fantastic ability that we know he's got. So, yeah, for me, I think in a must-win test match, I don't think he makes the 11.
I'm not sure whether he's going to make the 11. I've got a funny feeling they may pick him, actually, but I agree with Paul 100%. I think he's done.
Yeah.
I don't see another 5-wicket haul in him. And the thing that, and I know you don't want to get into amateur psychology too much because you go down some pretty stupid rabbit holes when you do, but to me, he's always looked angry, Anderson, on the field, but in this series, he's looked more tired than angry. He's looked more frustrated and just a little bit, not disinterested, but a little bit like, oh, God, here we go again.
Can I throw a word at you, Dylan? Dejected.
Dejected, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I've kind of found him. But cricket's such a fickle game. You know what I mean? And on any given day, it could turn. He gets a couple early. Dadoosh, he's away. But, yeah, point taken. Now, let's go to the English innings. Crawley.
Yeah, creepy Crawley.
Oh,
Jesus.
man, I tell you what. He's one of those players who looks magnificent getting 30 or 40. You know what I mean? He's one of those players. And there was another English player on the tour to Australia last time, James Vince, who's very similar, actually. Beautiful to watch, but then just self-destructs. Pretty lucky early on, I thought, in his innings. But then just absolutely sublime, Paul Ford. Such a sweet and luscious striker of the ball.
So absolutely superb timing. Yeah, you're right. He just got his timing going, and there were some glorious cover drives, but also just sort of no feet, just throws the hands at it and just middled so many deliveries. He's also, because he's so tall, they talk about the short ball being reasonably ineffective against him, and he was really hitting his hooks and pulls beautifully. It's quite disconcerting when Creepy Crawley comes wandering down at you like a daddy long legs and just turns, a short ball kind of into a half volley almost. It was great to watch. And, I know McCullum's kind of taken him under his wing and said, nah, this guy's got the goods. I'm sticking with it. I'm sticking with him. And, it should have been a match-winning innings.
Yeah. And just on the Crawley front too, I think, Dylan, to a certain extent, the Australians got it wrong with him. They started the short pitch stuff, and that's not as effective against him. He is prone outside that off stump, you know what I mean? Yep. That's where he's been dismissed. And indeed, the commentators were discussing that the Australians didn't really get it right in their bowling to him. And interestingly, I thought, and I mentioned in my opening there, the Australians and Cummins in particular looking lost, yeah, in disarray. And the commentators also made the point, you're looking down on the field there, there's 4 or 5 guys out in the field waving their arms around. And that's when you go, well, hang on, who's the skipper here?
It was Cummins' toughest day as a cricketer, I think, both as a captain and as a bowler. He didn't bowl particularly well. He did have a bit of bad luck, and Crawley, as magnificent as he was, he also played about 5 or 6 just horrendous shots where you think, oh, my God, that's just a wicket.
Yes.
And that's what he looked like in New Zealand, right, except that was happening earlier. He was a walking wicket out here, and I can't believe they kind of kept but as Paul mentioned, it's McCullum's project, so he would have loved that. But, yeah, Cummins looked lost. The field sets were weird at times. Like they went ultra defensive before they needed to, I thought. And he didn't bowl particularly well. Hazelwood looked down on pace. I know he still got a 5-wicket bag, but he looked quite hittable. Stark was having one of those days where the ball wasn't swinging as much, so it wasn't effective. It just looked like a average attack, and I was sitting there watching it going, well, this isn't an average attack. But it is, and I'm going to go hark back to this word, it's what Bazball can do to you.
Yes.
It can actually turn a really good attack into a completely ineffective, and worse than that, a bit of a rabble. And that's what happened. Not the first time it's happened in the series, but the first time it's happened for a sustained period of
time, yeah. I mean, the feeling that I was getting watching it pull forward, it was that the skipper was in disarray, and the whole team almost, the vibe was, what the hell are we doing? You know what I mean? and I've made the point before about Steve Smith, who we know wants to be skipper and was probably sitting there. And he was doing a lot of, placing the field and stuff. They were really under the pump there from the English batsmen.
And it's a weird thing too, because it's sort of like, it's not like Steve Smith was some world beater as a captain. You don't.
Yes.
He's not in the annals of history as some amazing captain, but he's just seems, you used the word before, I think, frustrated. They just seemed like they weren't quite sure what they were meant to be doing. And I guess they had a team that wasn't sort of their normal 11. And I think, again, we come back to that point, no Nathan Lyon, just put a guy at one end, he bowls 40 overs for 63.
Yeah.
Probably gets a couple of wickets. But a very, very gourmet bowling attack. Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins, not bad. And yeah, for since the dawn of time, Australians in England, isn't it just nick them out? Isn't that the plan?
Yeah.
It just seems like it's worked forever, particularly for that bowling attack. And they went away from it. And, I think you're absolutely bang on, Dylan. It's Bazball getting in their heads and going, it worked for them, so maybe we should try it. Just not their game. And it was interesting seeing guys like Glenn McGrath kind of coming out of the media and going, what the bloody hell are we doing? This makes no sense to me.
It was on Australia.
Just shows how out of character it was.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point too, Ree Lyon. I mean, what a massive loss in the context of their bowling attack, because as we know, he ties up one end, you get your quickies at the other just rotating continuously. Lyon also a wicket taker, so he's a threat, and they missed him massively. And I think it was a mistake from their point of view to not, was it Murphy?
Not pick Murphy.
Pick Murphy and just load up the batting, or put a couple of all-rounders in there. I would have dropped Green, kept Mitch, and done that. Waiting! But interesting in terms of turnarounds too, because I just feel like England were just rolling over the top of Australia in terms of turnarounds. Alex Carey, since that run out, is kind of sliding downhill. Bairstow had a great match, and it was very evident. Dylan Cleaver, he's a confidence player, and when his confidence is up, he's hard to beat.
Stuck out his right mitt in that first innings and grabbed one off the turf.
Yes.
And so that was a brilliant catch. All of a sudden that flows into his demeanour, walking to the crease.
Yes.
And he looked more himself. And then he just started flaying it. I mean, that was incredible. Did Anderson walk out to bat to join him when he was on 45 or 49? It was something like that. And it almost felt like, because the commentators were saying, what's the point in sending Anderson out?
Yes.
Now, all he's going to do is get hurt. And is a 50 to Bairstow really that significant a landmark that they should risk him for that? Well, he ends up getting 99 not out. Probably he screwed it up more than Anderson. He hit on 98. He hit a ball down to long off. Something in his head must have thought 2, so it was about the first ball of the over. He ran the first one hard, slipped over at the non-striker's end. Anderson was nearly run out. In the end, he was LBW the next ball. So it was a bit of a laugh actually. And the Australians have now been given Bairstow grief because he walked off the ground celebrating to one and all, doing the bat swirl above his head, and the Aussies in the media and social media are saying, you don't do that unless you get 100. I don't care if it's 99 out, not out. It's weak as piss, mate.
Yeah.
Two things about that. How good are the English at winding the Australians up? I mean, I don't know if it's like a part of their tactics, but some of the stuff that they've been saying and doing, there's the kind of I saw Stuart Broad come out and go, I know I've got him out heaps, but bowling at David Warner is actually really hard. It's like, what? Yeah. Are you sure? They invoke the spirit of cricket left, right and centre. They talk about having no regrets, even though they've lost the test and they're only there to have fun. They're declaring early, the kind of
moral victories.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. And I think this is just another example of that, where it's like, this is Bairstow just doing that. He would know that's going to piss the Australians off. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And I thought as well, I didn't actually realise how. I'd never really sat down. I watched a full press conference with Johnny Bairstow, which was about 9 minutes, nothing dramatic. But he was so spiky. God, he's so grumpy. He seems like he's got a very delicate ego. So apparently they were saying
he's a redhead.
Yeah.
But I thought he'd be actually quite tough, but it seems like he's sort of just a bit of a, I don't know, just.
He's known for being ridiculously sensitive to criticism.
Yeah. And they were saying that, how on the TV coverage they have sort of 3 blokes interview the players at the end of the day. He didn't want Kumar. He refused to go onto it if Kumar Sangakkara was there, because Kumar Sangakkara had been criticising his wicket keeping. But basically what Sangakkara was actually saying was, gosh, this is a big ask to play in the middle order, score at 1,000 strike rate, plus be the wicketkeeper having had a sore leg. That was the point that Sangakkara was making. Like, this was a bit stupid as a selection. Nothing against Bairstow. And yet Bairstow was very, very belligerent, very spiky in the press conference and wanted everyone to sort of feel sorry for him about having had his sore leg. It was quite an interesting situation.
I don't know how you guys feel about Sangakkara. I really enjoy his commentary. He's a clearly intelligent man and knows his cricket to the nth degree.
Totally agree.
So the English have a massive lead.
Yes.
Send them back in. Always looming in the background there, fellas. Rain, 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 rain. But England makes some great ground. But that pest Marnus.
Yeah.
He comes right, doesn't he? He comes right.
He looked good in the first innings, actually, when getting 50, and then just played a weird shot, a very un-Marnus-like shot, which he's been doing frequently this series. He just chipped one out to the outfield. But this time he got in and wasn't going anywhere. And he looked like he was he looked like he could have batted for a week. Actually. Yeah. I was actually surprised when he went out, when he did. And they needed it. Rain was looming in the background, but with 4 down at the end of day 3, you're sort of thinking, jeepers, even if it's biblical, they're surely going to get enough overs.
Yeah, a little half a session. Yeah, a half session there, a half session here.
Never happened. Mitchell Marsh also dug in.
I was going to make that point too, Paul Ford, that Mitch Marsh has really grabbed his opportunity with both hands. He's looked super confident.
The people's champion. I think he's. I didn't actually bring the stats along with me today, but I think last time I looked, he was top of the top of the batting stats for the Australians. And yeah, you'd have to say after being kind of, I think I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, one of the most hated cricketers in Australia has actually done pretty well in the limited opportunities that he's been given. And, I love seeing stories like that, actually. I almost feel sorry for him, even though he's Australian.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what impressed me about him was just how confident he was out there. He didn't look tentative. He didn't look doubtful. He just knew his game and went, right, I'm grabbing this opportunity. And on that front, actually, and conversely, Dylan, really putting some pressure on Green now, who has, as we've discussed previously, for me, never quite fulfilled this extraordinary player kind of reputation that he has.
Yeah, the new Keith Miller, wasn't he?
Yes.
And just hasn't quite done it yet. I mean, he's going to be a very good player.
Oh, he will be.
But, yeah, it's just one of those things that Mitchell Marsh now looks like a better option.
Yes, he does.
Does Cameron Green think he's a batter who bowls or a bowler who bats?
Good
feel like he doesn't really know what his role is.
Yeah.
A gully that does a bit of both.
Yeah, maybe.
He's a good gully.
Yeah, because he's a more than bloody useful bowler. You know what I mean? He's nippy, and has the ability with the bat. So yeah, he hasn't quite reached his potential yet. Fellas, and then the rain came, and I was in a depression and a fug about that. And I had so many people that have since spoken to me and said, Jace, what about the rules, mate? Can't you just put a day aside for rain or something like that, and the purist in me goes, no, that's Test cricket. That's Test cricket. But it is such a bastard that we didn't have a result there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what can you do? That rain was pretty biblical, particularly on the fifth day.
Yes.
I mean, I flicked over and watched the golf from Liverpool, which was just down the road, and that was pretty miserable too. So
yes.
You get under.
Harmon, how good.
Oh,
Gotta hate golf.
Oh, do you? Doesn't he look like Ricky Ponting?
Yeah, freakishly like Ricky Ponting. And Ricky Ponting was there on that day too.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. So,
and he's been called that guy for years, and he's like, what are the chances? And then literally they met. Yeah, bizarre.
Just as a very quick sideline to that with Harmon, they said, what are you going to do to celebrate? You won a lot of money, blah, blah. And he said, I bought a new tractor, so I'm just going to mow my grass for a couple of days. And I went, yeah, that's my kind of dude, actually. I like it.
Because he hadn't told his wife how much money he'd spent on that new tractor.
I was going to say, it must be a hell of a tractor.
So he's going to get away with it now, he reckons.
Yes, he is.
But, can you do anything about it? I was just telling Paul off air, there's probably not until you get a whole bunch of IPL rainouts that someone will be moved. Private money will be moved to develop stadiums with mesh netting over the top or something. God, I mean, we must be able to do something. Rain seeding on the top of stadiums where you blast out thermal air to push the rain to the sides. Who knows? But jeepers, I described it as the ultimate in optimism is to schedule a 5-day test for Manchester, which is one of the rainiest places in the UK. In fact, the rainiest place in the UK is Cardiff, where they also schedule tests every now and then. One of the least rainiest places in the UK is London, so maybe just schedule every test in London or Nottingham. But yeah, I think Paul was going to furnish us with some specifically Manchester rain stats.
Yes, I heard a stat this week. I can't remember who said it, otherwise I would actually acknowledge it, but my apologies. But one day every 2.7 tests at Manchester is washed out, which is quite high. That's quite high. So to your point, Dylan, if you play at Lord's or at the Oval in London, that's very unlikely. Well, those numbers are a lot higher in terms of how many days are lost per test match. Manchester is like right up there in the wettest places. So there was talk of maybe playing those games earlier in the series so that you can factor in the rain by the time you come to the, you play the sort of finales in places that are much more likely to be dry. I mean, I think in terms of those rain rules, look, I feel like rain, like what happened in that test match, really bloody hard to navigate that.
Yeah.
And it does add to the drama, and you've got the sort of sniping from the teams around how they're going to win and how rain's going to save them and all of that. It sort of adds to it. But, I think both teams have had pretty shitty over rates. So they literally didn't bowl as many overs as they should have when the sun was shining, or at least the rain wasn't falling. I think one thing that you could do is shift the session times to align a bit better with the daylight hours. I don't really. I heard Joe Root say something. Oh, we could play till 10 o'clock. I don't know how that works for if you're batting or bowling till 10 o'clock. I don't think that's necessarily the answer. But for example, if it was going to be dry the next morning at 9:30, why not start the match at sort of 9:30 or 10 o'clock? That feels like, and just play the match with all the same sort of session times and so on. But actually do a little bit of time shifting to align with daylight hours, because at least you can predict those, as opposed to rain. But look, it's really hard to do it based on a weather forecast. I've heard it being talked about as sort of unfair, and it's classic English whinging. It's not unfair. It's just bloody annoying.
Yeah, It's just frustrating, and that's cricket, as they say. Well, speaking of the fifth Test match at the Oval in London, where it isn't as rainy, the Australians full of themselves, England whining. But I still think, Dylan, there's a lot for England to play for here. To prove
drawn series.
A drawn series to prove a few points. They won't have the Ashes, but by God, if they do it 2-2, I reckon they'll have bragging rights.
And Australia speak of their huge regret in 2019 when they drew a series where they had been in ascendancy for most of it.
Yes.
I think that was the Ben Stokes at Headingley miracle series. But Australia had secured the Ashes then by the fourth Test, lost the last Test also at the Oval, I think, and they've all spoken of how that really stuck in their craw. That was a rock under the towel.
Summer.
Where they're lying on the beach.
Yeah.
So Australia have got a bit to play for. I think Cummins in particular has got a lot to play for. I think under normal circumstances, he would have wanted to have one of these tests off and given Smith one test as captain. I don't think he's going to now. I think that test in Manchester probably left such a bad taste in his mouth on a personal level that he'll want to finish the series as an Ashes winning captain, not just an Ashes drawing the series captain. And obviously England, they've been firing shots all week about how the rain saved Australia, and the Australian coaches coming out and said, no, it didn't save us. We could have won that test. So it's
your normal stuff.
I kind of genuinely think that there are a few players on each team that actually don't like each other as well. Like when New Zealand...
What, in the Australian team?
Australian team and the England team. I think there's actually some real genuine distaste for the way each other goes about their business.
Right, yeah.
Whereas when New Zealand play England and New Zealand play Australia, we're just so damn nice that it's a bit of a phony war. There might be a few things that get picked up by the press and made a bit about, but there's no actual genuine dislike there. I think there actually really is a little bit of... I think Australia in particular are sick of how the English are painting themselves as the saviour of Test cricket, and I think that's really got up their goat. So there is heaps to play for, and I, for one, am going to be on the couch.
I'll be watching it. Don't you worry about that. So England unchanged. Cummins, I'm picking that he'll play Paul Ford. Do you think the Australians going to run with the same side, or they might go, hold on here, let's get a spinner and, tie up one end?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts on this. I wonder whether Stark's fit, so you might find Nisa comes in.
Oh, yes.
I wondered whether they might drop Green and go with Murphy, because I think, to your point earlier, it's the last Ashes Test for a whole bunch of them, you'd assume. They haven't won a series in England for 22 years. The last thing they want is to get it to the end of that Test match, having been thumped by England. England are celebrating their tits off, and they're going around going, we retained the Ashes 2-2. I mean, it's just going to feel so flat. So I think they will be desperate to take it to 3-1, and to Dylan's point, shut the Poms up, have them actually say that they regret some of the things they did. I think about this game almost as a referendum on Bazball, right? Because if England win, they can claim the moral victory and blah, 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 and all of that kind of stuff. But if they don't, it's really a victory for Australia. It's ruthlessness over entertainment. And I think, on the face of it, this fifth game with sort of nothing on the line, so to speak, it should feel like it's dropped down a level. But I actually think both teams have got a lot to play for. And what I am most interested in is, will Andrew McDonald and Brendan McCullum actually have beers at the end of it? We know the spin bowling coaches from both teams will, because they've had bugger all to do, won't they?
Yeah.
Vittori and Jeetan Patel. So I don't think there's any doubt there'll be beers there. I feel like England have from the Australian point of view, have kind of got their heads in the sand around how they stuffed up those first 2 test matches. And the Aussies are going to really want to stick it up them for sure.
To play devil's advocate just very quickly there, I totally agree England stuffed up the first test.
Yes.
Monumentally. I think they were lucky to get as close as they did in the second test. But on the same level, Australia kind of stuffed up that third test. I think each team has definitely stuffed up 1 test each. And again, it's just the biggest regret I've got is that it's not 2 all going into.
Yes.
That would just be a powder keg.
To chuck in my 2 cents, and this is how I feel about it, I don't feel... I take your point that if Australia do win 3-1, then Bazball will be under the gun and all that jazz. As far as I'm concerned, Bazball has got them to where they are now. I think if they had just played their traditional game, they wouldn't have got within cooey of Australia. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
And I think Bazball has... And I don't think that actually the players are going up there going, oh, we're all about entertainment. I think they go out there and they're actually we're about being aggressive and winning test matches. That's what I think their mentality is. And I think it's thrown the Australians to some degree. And whether they win or lose or draw the series, I think it would be massively unfair to say, oh, Bazball wasn't working.
Do not throw Bazball out with the bathwater.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
But let's not forget, out of the last 19 Ashes test matches, England have won 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which says try something different. And so you can go, yep,
exactly.
Awesome. It's great that you've tried something different over those 5 tests. But if they lose 3-1...
Yeah, I definitely take your point. But then you look on the flip side of that and you say, okay, so what is the different approach that you're going to take? Oh, we're going to play traditional test cricket? Nah. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
But anyway, you mentioned too, potentially, fellas, the retirement of some legends of the game, and I'm loath to say that, Dum Dum and Steve Smith potentially. Personally, I don't see Steve Smith retiring, but I definitely see Warner maybe making this his last test.
I think maybe Warner might get the message.
Right.
It's his last test.
Whether he wants to or not.
Yeah, because he's stated he wants to go out in Sydney. He's planned his goodbye. You know? It's like planning your own funeral in some ways. But Steve Smith's actually made noises about, I mean, he spends a lot of time in New York, believe it or not.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he just says, nah, that's it. Might go and play a bit of global franchise cricket, make some money.
Yeah, maybe. But, on the other side of that, people talk so much, Paul, about what a fanatic cricket player he is. In his bed, in his room, bloody shadow batting for hours on end. You know what I mean? What's he going to do with his life?
Oh, I don't think he'll be lost to cricket. I think he'll still play. But I think he's probably a little bit sick of going to overseas countries and having people chant at him for hours on end about crying on the television, doing sandpaper jokes, all of that stuff. And maybe he's under this illusion that when he plays for a franchise team, they'll forget about all of that stuff. Maybe the expat Pakistanis and Indians in New York, maybe they have forgotten about that stuff, to be fair. Look, I think, what's he averaging? 30-something in this Ashes series? Maybe he's kind of lost the magic. I don't know. I'd love to see him come out to New Zealand next summer. So, I kind of hope that he doesn't. But, there's going to be a few of them. Stark, potentially Hazelwood, Lyon obviously is another one. And then throw in all the English players. I think there's going to be a lot of change when we look at what the next Ashes teams look like compared to the 30-odd blokes that have been going around in this series. Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, man. And, I have wondered, we've just been talking about Bazball, and it's all about confidence. It's all about backing yourselves. It's all about believing in what you're doing and stuff. But whether or not at the end of the series the English will have regrets about and acknowledge, as maybe perhaps you touched on, Paul, we kind of blew it at some points there, or whether they'll be, hey, we gave it our best shot, Dylan. We gave it everything we had, and we didn't quite get over the line. Yeah, well, they're finishing the series strongly, which always colours things. There was actually a bit of noise starting to percolate after the first 2 tests about, hey,
perhaps Bazball only works against minnows.
Yes.
But I've noticed that their press has kind of swung in behind Bazball more, as you tend to do when you're winning, right? But a fantastic victory from the jaws of defeat in Headingley and finishing all over the top of them at Manchester. If they win at the Oval, I don't think there'll be too many regrets.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Paul?
No, look, I agree. And, I'll cards on the table. I would prefer England to win this fifth test and it to be 2-2 and for things to feel a bit murky and a bit weird and both teams to feel awkward. I'm sort of happy with that. The kissing your sister scenario. I do think that first test will haunt England. I think, and I genuinely mean this with hindsight. I didn't think this at the time, but the early declaration, I thought that was cool at the time. I think that they'll regret that. Root was 120 something not out.
Yeah.
If they score another 100 runs, would Australia win by 2 wickets? I think you could look at that. You touched on it before, Dylan. Australia have made mistakes. England have made more mistakes more often, and I think that's been the difference. Could they have picked Wood in that first game? Was he so injured that he couldn't have played? Could they have dropped fewer catches? Could they have not missed stumpings? Could they have done a bit less kamikaze batting in both innings? I think that's the one that's going to haunt them the most.
Yep. Now, moving on to Major League Cricket, New Zealanders on the American stage, not doing too handily there, Dylan Cleaver.
No, Corey Anderson is. The forgotten Corey Anderson's playing pretty well, and Devon Conway's got this intriguing habit of getting a 51 game in the first ball duck the next.
Yes.
But he's actually doing all right. But, Martin Guptill is... I feel really sorry for him, actually, because he's in that Knight Riders team, and obviously that could open a few doors to other Knight Riders franchises if he plays really well. He gets 2 bats, gets 2 ducks, 2 third ball ducks. Santner's done all right, a couple of wickets, a few runs here and there, but Phillips and Finn Allen and Guptill have had really sketchy tournaments with the bat.
Trenty, lovely 27 wickets to be 7th equal. Santner 4, Lockie 3, Anderson 2. Things are going a bit better for the New Zealanders at the Global T20 in Canada, with old Colin de Grandhomme smashing it, Munro scoring runs, and LVB taking wickets.
Yeah, Logan van Beek is the top wicket taker there. I guess he's Dutch now, not New Zealand, isn't he? But yeah, Colin de Grandhomme scoring at something like 200 and strike rate of 240. I think he's averaging only 17, but when you're coming down the order, that's fine. Take that.
You love these leagues, don't you, Paul?
I was on a plane today, and I just wanted to let you know that Dean Foxcroft are vaping Tom Blundell, and Rachin Ravindra are looking very sprightly, very fit and healthy as they head to the nets at the Bay Oval over the next few days, I assume, in preparation for their exciting trip to the UAE.
Did you say a vaping Tom Blundell?
Yes, I did.
What is it about smoking and wicket
keepers? Controversy. I would never in a million years imagine that Latham liked to vape. Isn't that weird?
Latham or Blundell?
Blundell.
Oh, it was Blundell was on the vape.
Jeepers,
yeah, you see, I can see that.
We almost got sued then.
Yeah, totally. I retract. Hey, breaking news. The ICC has approved a cap of 4 overseas players, active or retired, and 7 local players, which can include associate players, for all new T20 leagues. The ruling will not initially affect existing tournaments such as the UAE-based International League T20, the US's Major League Cricket, and Canada's Global T20, all of which allow more than 4 overseas players in the playing 11. These leagues will, however, have to conform to those limits within a reasonable period of time.
Oh, my God. What is going on here? So it's a rule that doesn't apply to any of the actual tournaments that exist that anyone gets paid for.
Additionally, leagues will have to pay a 10% release fee to the home board of each player it hires every season.
That reasonable period of time is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that.
It definitely is. Like in the UAE league, they have 9. In the US cricket one, they have 6 overseas players. CPL's 5. What other one? There's another one. Yeah, maybe the South African one. Whatever. Anyway,
yeah,
it seems that is hilarious. I think even how many in the IPL is that? 4.
4.
Is that why?
Oh, they have more in the squad, but only 4 can play. Or was it actually?
Yeah, right.
It was actually only 3.
It's hilarious. And I mean, those leagues are going to be pissed off about that, to be honest, aren't they? They are going to be, as you say, once that starts to come in, there's going to be all sorts of shenanigans thrown around that because that's going to look like the ICC is just protecting its patch, which obviously it's going to do. There's some interesting politics that goes on around those leagues, particularly the three that happen at the same time: the Big Bash League, the South African League, and the UAE League. Those three all happen at the same time, so they are literally jostling and elbowing players in and out of their squads.
Did you leave the Super Smash out of that on purpose?
Yeah, what is the overseas player limit on the Super Smash, Dylan? Is there it seems like it's about none.
Yeah, I think we've had 2 in the past, but
Brad Hodge.
We're scraping the grade cricket in Sydney and Perth to get overseas players.
In terms of Test cricket, of course, the West Indies and India have been playing. I don't know if you guys have caught much of that.
A little bit.
Jeez Louise.
It's hard
tedious.
Going, eh?
Yeah, tedious is the word. Waiting! And The Guardian actually had something interesting to say about this. Peer a little closer and the revolution seems to be in a more gestational phase. The first giveaway is the empty seats. Both stadiums are almost entirely deserted. On the home page of Trinidad's Daily Express newspaper, the island's first test in 5 years features just below a report about the national volleyball team's performances in the Caribbean Zonal Championships. The Jamaica Gleaner relegates its West Indies coverage to an inside page. Did you not get the memo, guys? Stokes and Brendan McCullum are making this stuff good again.
Yeah, so the context for that is that McCullum and Stokes have been talking about rescuing Test cricket, essentially. Yes. And this writer,
England.
Yeah, and this writer from The Guardian, Jonathan Liu, has made the point that, that's all well and good, but it's got to involve more than 3 teams, which it is at the moment.
It's totally right. And I mean, when you actually look at how West Indies cricket has ever worked, and we could talk about this for hours, and we're not going to, but it's a miracle that it ever succeeded. The fact is, it was never set up to be a sustainable model because it was just a shambles, really. And they just happened to have a whole lot of really good players emerged at the same time to form at different periods in their history some incredible teams. And I think I've seen talk, at the end of the day, the cricket economy in the West Indies is just not big enough to sustain the pay packets that their players can demand. I do worry that what we're seeing in the West Indies, to a certain extent, is what could happen here in New Zealand, because we are in exactly the same position where we can't pay our best players to play for us as much as we would want them to be playing for us, because they're going to get, there's the obvious moths to the flame of the franchise money, and eventually, as that plays out, we started to see that with the rumours around Jofra Archer, you end up with players playing for the same owner in multiple leagues. When are they going to play for New Zealand? Why are they going to need to? The answer to the latter question is they're never going to need to. There is a little bit of a crystal ball gazing here that this is something that we need to look out for, and it's a little bit scary, and it's really sad, because who doesn't love seeing a strong West Indies team? They're amazing cricketers, and they're still going to be amazing cricketers, but they're not going to be playing for the West Indies very often, and if they are, only ever T20s.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time that West Indies were playing really poorly against India, you had Kieran Pollard, you had Brett playing in the MLC, you had Brathwaite playing in the Canadian T20, Hipmeyer, Pooran, Nareen, Andre Russell. It's really sad. And look, it's not just the West Indies. Obviously, Zimbabwe basically don't exist as a test nation anymore. They last played England in 2003, and when they tried to schedule a test with Australia in 2022, Australia just outright refused to play them. And meanwhile, England, Australia and India are scheduled to play each other 34 times between now and 2027.
Wow. I'm really curious as to whether the West Indies team actually come to Australia to play these test matches over summer. I mean, that is going to be an absolute mockery.
Yeah, well, there you go. That finishes us off for this particular podcast.
On
fellas.
a downbeat note.
Yeah, downbeat note. But I'm sure all three of us will be tuning in for that fifth test match. And like you guys, I think the general vibe in the BYC is go England.
Yeah, I think
would
so.
I be right?
Yeah.
I want to see 2-2. I think 2-2 would be a fairer reflection of the series than 3-1.
I have got a little bit annoyed with some of their rhetoric and the narrative that they're pushing. But, yeah, I still would quite like to see, as Paul said, that murky situation where neither England and Australia can claim to win would be really quite delicious in some ways.
A bit of sister kissing, but really a referendum on whether cricket should be fun and entertaining or ruthless pursuit of victory.
Great stuff. Much to ponder. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. We'll be back next week, won't we, fellas?
Yeah, why
Yeah,
not?
sounds good. Tell all your mates about it. Download us. Subscribe. All that jazz. Rate us. 5 stars. Good stuff.